And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. It's a fantastic crowd tonight. This is a very special report that we're doing. And of course, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hello, everybody.
So it's just been an incredible kind of, I mean, I don't even know what you call this, but there was a huge fire downtown. And we've had all these weird technical problems here. And then the famed Dark Journalist laptop that Miss Olivia commandeers so well for the chats suddenly won't load
at all.
Now, I do want to say this because, you know, we're not too into the paranoid on this one, but I have to tell you something quite interesting, which is when I was preparing this report and reaching out in relation to it, I was told that the report wouldn't stay up long. So keep that in mind as we go along. And it is quite interesting that we started the broadcast talking about this massive fire, and we hope the best for all the people that are going through that downtown. I think it's mostly the houses that are on fire and that the people wound up being okay. But we're keeping our eyes on it. And I do want to say, though, for Ttsa and the subject of our video tonight of the special report, I wanted to actually call this "The Lie Is Over."
Wow.
And in a sense, we are kind of burning down the house in a different sense because we're going to burn it down. You know, it's interesting. As I've been approaching this, I've been told over and over again by people in the field that there's too much of a clamor and that Ttsa was going to get its way through because it was backed by a lot of money in the Central Intelligence Agency. I can tell you right now, one thing I learned a long time ago is one man or one media outfit armed with the truth or one incredible group armed with the truth constitutes a majority. So we have the truth on our side, and we're going to be able to prove it tonight that what the To the Stars Academy has laid out there isn't true, and that this is a lie from start to finish. And also the promises of disclosure wrapped up around this are not regular disclosure. This is CIA disclosure on display. And the figures involved who promoted it, including the New York Times, Harry Reid, Politico, and certain select journalists in that group under the sway of the Central Intelligence Agency, were promoted in here to give us a false CIA disclosure. And it's quite interesting because I've laid this out in a great many reports about the Ttsa since January of 2018. That is, we saw them coming. But one thing that's very important happened today, that as I've outlined, that there's two groups operating around the UFO file right now. One of the groups has to do with Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and Tom DeLonge. That was one branch, and they thought Hillary was getting in, and they were going to ride the coattails of that in to do all these disclosure things, and Elizondo was going to be touted as a hero and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, they had that plan going, but the thing that they missed was who was in the executive office. They didn't get that right, so that was a really big problem. And on President Trump's side, he came forward and developed the Space Force, and this was his approach to getting control of the UFO file. So you have two competing groups there. We're going to find out also in relation to President Trump, as we've spelled out on this show many times through his uncle, he has those connections to understand what the UFO file and the X technology is all about. This is a very significant portion. It's been widely neglected as the UFO community has run around like tween girls running after a bad pop, a K-pop, K-pop star. And this has been, you know, literally, you've had some of the major UFO groups publishing press releases as articles, press releases from the Ttsa crafted, writers who were hired. There's no journalism involved. I also want to say that there are a lot of there's a number of figures who have really staked their reputations and their careers with Ttsa, and I feel bad for them, including George Knapp, who really has hung in there. And you know, George Knapp is one of these people who, over the course of time, I've grown very fond of the work that he's done over the years, and he was a great inspiration on me. So it does not thrill me to put forward the idea that he's part of this carnival. But unfortunately, the forces that he's working with, Harry Reid and Bigelow, are trying to, with the CIA, rifle this down the American people's throat and the people of the world. And it's the lie is over, especially tonight. The lie is over. And we're going to start heavy. Now, this is very important. Today, President Trump got asked by George Stephanopoulos of ABC News Now, but formerly a major Clinton insider. And as a matter of fact, he was Clinton's campaign manager in 1992 when he got in. We all know Stephanopoulos, and I hate to say it, but he's a real weasel journalist. He's twisted the facts for years, and that's what they do there at ABC. Unfortunately, I always look for good journalists, and I don't find them very often. So they asked him these questions in relation to the UFO file, and Trump was evasive, trying to kind of get it more on his terms, saying, well, I believe in pilots, but I'm not really sure about the way you're presenting this. And it went on and on as this little back and forth game, as Stephanopoulos was pushing and trying to get him to agree, in a way, trying to get him to condone this operation that's being run by the Central Intelligence Agency to rifle in this false version of disclosure. So Trump came back today and went on record with this and said, quote, that he doesn't particularly believe in unidentified flying objects. This was the first headline that the newspapers ran with, and it was very interesting. I noticed something, though, as it was developing as a story. Suddenly, they didn't like that so much because it kind of flattened out their narrative, because they're working with fake CIA disclosure, and Trump's not given them anything to work with. And they're saying, what about these Navy pilots and all the rest of it? Look, we've always had Navy pilots who have seen UFOs. They've been on record since the 1930s, okay? So that's nothing new, and it is significant. However, those people can also be used. So we have to keep that in mind as we go along here as well. So let's keep that in mind. They are legitimate witnesses who've had legitimate experiences, but they're being made to create this narrative that UFOs were suddenly discovered by Ttsa and the CIA in this December 2017 article in the New York Times. Let's see how they twist the story here after Trump gave those. Then suddenly, because it did come up, and they said, well, have you had any briefings about this whole UFO thing? And he said, oh, yeah, I've had one or whatever. He was really totally keeping the cards close to his table. So instead of saying now that the Trump doesn't believe in UFOs, they decided to change the narrative. They were like, this isn't working for us. And here's what they decided to say. Trump says he was briefed on UFO sightings. This is the line that they wanted to go with, even though he was shutting them down. Trump says he was briefed on Navy sightings of UFO. Navy, again. Okay. By the time you get to USA Today afterwards, it says they no longer like the Trump doesn't believe in UFOs thing because it flattens out their narrative. So what they say is Trump got a briefing on UFOs but said he doesn't particularly believe in them. Now they're leading with Trump got a briefing on UFOs. This is what you'll see over and over again. Trump got a briefing. Trump got a briefing. That's USA Today, who has been shamelessly promoting the Ttsa. And it's absolutely scandalous. When we get to the root of this, we're going to see how the CIA manipulated the entire media story and used their assets in the media to push it down everybody's throat, to promote a company and a narrative that they wanted to go with to develop this false threat narrative. And they got a whole History Channel show, The Unidentified now, which is on Friday nights, pushing this same thing. Now, I do want to say as we get along here, there are UFO figures that I hope will take the time to really call this out with me. And I think that the good UFO researchers have been quiet for too long about the CIA presence inside the Ttsa. We've had enough of that, and we're not going to have CIA disclosure. The cat's out of the bag. We've let the cat out of the bag. John Greenwald's let the cat out of the bag. So many people have let the cat out of the bag. It's not going to work. So whatever they're promising people, and we've heard the stories on the inside about them going to individual researchers and saying, you'll get so much here, and then you'll have this long-term plan of all these profits and all this influence and be part of these projects. That's how they work. And frankly, in any normal situation, when you're working with projects and things like that, it's nice to hear, right? If you're an author, hey, I've got these projects coming up. There's nothing wrong with that. But trying to get them to go along and not give us the full story, to kind of like suddenly cozy up to the CIA as your best friend, is not a good idea. And though I think some of the really good researchers have not gone along with TSA, I don't think that they've rebuked them sufficiently by a long shot. I think that they've done the whole, well, TTSA has done some good things. That's not going to work. You're going to have to really call it out. We've said this before when it came up with the lies that were coming out of Gaia TV in relation to the whole blue chicken cults and the galactic ambassadors and all this kind of stuff. And everybody sat on the sidelines until 3 years later, we have the producer of the show saying it was all fake. Okay, so we have to get on this early. We can't have 3 years of cult activity and God knows what else, especially at this level. Some guy, a TV fantasy show, big deal. This stuff is very dangerous. It's the Central Intelligence Agency rifling a threat through the media. And we have to catch it here and we have to stop it. So let's take a look at some of the other kind of major news stories that have twisted this. First of all, we know there's an amazing Intercept article that came out by a guy named Keith Clore, who did a really good job on this. And Keith Clore is not a guy that I would ordinarily agree with because, of course, I believe in the UFO factor. I believe that there is technology and there are hidden programs in the U.S. government relating to this technology around the UFO file. And the way I relate it in my X series is X technology. Now, however, I have to say, when a skeptic comes in and you see them do regular journalistic due diligence, you realize just how completely run over the UFO field, the alternative field, has been with the TTSA, which is a completely, as journalists like John Greenwald have shown, their narrative has been absurd, it's contradictory, and outright false. So, unfortunately, because people wanted to glamour on to some TV show or whatever, they got into it, and it's not going to look very pretty for them after the fact, unfortunately. So I would recommend everybody really turn the screws right now. Okay. The Intercept came out with this article. It said, the media loves this UFO expert who says he worked for an obscure Pentagon program, but did he? And this is Luis Elizondo, who we've done countless shows on. This is a counterintelligence agent, someone who's worked with the CIA, someone who's worked with John Brennan, who worked for the National Intelligence Director in counterintelligence, was a very particular type of intelligence work where you need to mislead large groups of people. And that's what it's designed for. Usually in the case of a foreign enemy who may think you're up to something and you have to convince them, well, this is what's actually happening, when in fact something completely different is happening. They're professional liars. That's the nature of the business, and more power to them in counterintelligence. However, when that counterintelligence is used on a community like the UFO field, or just the public at large who has an interest in the topic, we've got a real problem. And this guy was right at the heart of it. Now, at the beginning, they rolled him out in 2017 in October, and they presented him through the launch of To the Stars Academy. Eventually, he was put forward to the New York Times, and the New York Times went deep in December 16th, 2017, promoting Elizondo as a disgruntled employee who apparently was unhappy that they weren't following up on UFOs. Elizondo is a very complex Central Intelligence Agency player, and we have to keep in mind, whenever we look at the To the Stars Academy, we're going to find reams and reams of CIA operating this very, very expensive entertainment company, and passing it off as the real thing and getting journalists who are under their thumb to go along with it. Now, over and over again in this article, Keith Clore points out that all the things that Elizondo has said in relation to heading up the ATIP program, that's the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, or Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. You see how consistent they've been about the name there. ATIP is this program that supposedly Harry Reid greenlighted to get his friend Robert Bigelow $22 million over the course of 5 years. Now, Elizondo, who originally said the program ended in 2012, then he leaves in 2017 because he's disgruntled, and that leaves 5 years of him being disgruntled. That doesn't add up. Then later he was like, oh, the program continued, but there's no trail for the program. But he said it's not classified. And then later he said, oh, it's classified. So Elizondo is doing, I guess, what they call in the business tap dancing, just giving us any response to get out of really answering the question. And he said things like, oh, my pension, I've taken all these chances, my career's at stake, my pension's at stake. And then he'll also say, well, I don't violate anything in my non-disclosure agreement. So if you're not violating your non-disclosure agreement, then how are you under siege and all the rest of it? That just doesn't add up. So we've had enough of that. Certainly there's enough of a lie there going on. Now, I will say this in relation to Elizondo, that his story got very, very shaky, and they almost withdrew him at a certain point. But they ran into trouble because Tom DeLonge went on the Joe Rogan show, and he had a disastrous performance because he doesn't know the things that he's talking about, quite frankly. He has a lot of interest, but he was a disaster in terms of putting forward this thesis. But DeLonge had the name and the money, and they wanted to be able to do this through someone like that. And this is the way they've gone with it. Okay, so the article exposed that the Pentagon actually said that this guy did not head the ATIP program. He was not in charge of it, and he had no responsibilities in relation to it. That's the Pentagon. Now, in the very beginning, we had someone from Politico magazine named Brian Bender and the New York Times say that the Pentagon had vouched for this person. And we're going to get into that confusion too, because in 2017, the person, by the way, this person who's giving the information to the Intercept, his name, he's a Pentagon spokesperson officially, Christopher Sherwood. And he has gone on the record saying that Elizondo had nothing to do with the ATIP program. Very important, because their entire narrative hinges on the fact that he headed up the program. And of course, people like George Knapp have gone to Harry Reid, who said, oh yeah, he headed up the program and all the rest of it. But Elizondo has never made himself available for interviews except to the real softball people like Knapp, who will ask him questions like, how do you like taking all these risks? That's got to be tough to go out there and take all these risks, and not ask him, are you still working with the Central Intelligence Agency? Are you still a contractor for the Central Intelligence Agency? What is the nature of the contract, your contract with the Central Intelligence Agency or any program in the federal government? That's the question a journalist would ask. I don't know why Elizondo never gets these questions, but I'm starting to get a good idea. I'm going to remind everyone you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep on the Ttsa, and it's quite important, I think, for us to expose the CIA influence on the UFO file, and they're forcing it through the media and developing a kind of a cult around Ttsa with promises of advanced technology to come out and all the rest of it, which is really a caricature of the real thing. And this is what they're extremely good at. I see we have some great people in the house tonight, and Grandma Tippy Toes. I also saw that Groovy Bean is out there. Fantastic.
Doing a great job.
We're going to get into a lot of stuff tonight, and we know that Olivia is flying on the iPad tonight because the laptop crashed.
Yeah, I'm very limited.
How is that
what
going?
I can do. Not so great. I'm doing the best I can.
You can still blast the trolls. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I can do that. People are loving your energy tonight. They say you're on fire.
Oh, well, jeez. I'll tell you this much, which is, from my perspective, these are the types of things that really we can't allow to stand. And we have a real problem, which is there are people inside the alternative research community who won't stand up, who do have the reputation, who do have the clout to get rid of this. And they aren't, quite frankly. They're kind of going along with it, even though they'll say once in a while, yeah, it's not the real thing. you know, but they're still doing good stuff. You know, the old trade-off. I have a better idea. How about we go for the real thing and get rid of the CIA players and the money marketing and all this fluff and the political Tommy rod that's going on in this case, and really go for the genuine article. And I think that that's better than having this phony version out there, even though people are like, oh, but you know, they got the New York Times to talk about UFOs. Well, if they're lying, or if it's a CIA narrative, which clearly both are true, that they're lying and it is a CIA narrative, what's the point of that? That's like saying, well, gee, I want a cure for cancer. Even though this is a fake cure for cancer, it's better than nothing. No, it's not. How about looking for a genuine cure for cancer? So I would say this is the kind of mentality that we have to deal with on this, but we're going to do it going deep in, like, you know, it's not a personal thing. I have to say, when you get into true investigative journalism, it's not personal, but investigative journalism is adversarial by its very nature. And it can't ever be personal, because then it's unprofessional. And we certainly have tons of that as it is, whether you're dealing with the mainstream media or the independent. So it's not a personal thing. However, when someone comes forward and says, I ran a UFO identification program, then I quit because I was outraged that they weren't doing this, and now I work with Tom DeLonge and we're going to reveal all these UFOs, and then you find out that that's not true, and that they're a CIA counterintelligence agent working in a variety of intelligence capacities, well, then it's not the same thing, is it? Then you're going to have to call it out, and you're going to have to give public the information and let them know that this is what is being done. That's real journalism. This is not what we've had in the alternative side. In the mainstream side, there's something very, very nefarious going on with the story on the mainstream side. So if the independent side can call it out, the mainstream will be forced to retract. That's where we're going with this. But we already see cracks in the story. Okay, next up. What was happening after the Intercept article broke, and John Greenwald also put together an incredible timeline of the ATIP program and Elizondo's inconsistencies and outright falsehoods, including Harry Reid's also, and other people. This just wasn't adding up, and the cracks were starting to appear. We had done a number of shows exposing these factors and exposing the political connections that were going on here, but also the clash, as I was saying, on that one side, Podesta, DeLonge, Hillary Clinton, and that whole group, and then on the other side, Trump with the Space Force. This is very important, and we're going to show you very deep levels of that tonight. Next story up, Black Vault again. So what happened was, there's a guy named Brian Bender who helped break this story, and supposedly, now he's a foreign policy reporter at the Politico, and on that website. And what happens is, he's one of the people who originally promoted this idea that the Pentagon had confirmed this, and the New York Times had it. And we're going to get into why that original confirmation was tainted, because we have those people in business relationships with the Ttsa. So all their testimony gets thrown out. Also, I do have to mention, in relation to some of the reporting on this, that you know, George Knapp was a stockholder in Ttsa, which should have been revealed every time he did any report on them. And then he said, well, I'm not going to make a profit. I'm going to give the money to charity. But you have a vested interest. You know, if I had stock in Ttsa and I was doing reports like this, I guess they wouldn't be too happy. They're not too happy anyway. But I'd have to definitely reveal that. So it's the height of what the Ttsa has done here by swinging in billionaire Bigelow, and by swinging in political insider Harry Reid, who, remember, was the Senate Majority Leader. We're not talking about just a regular senator. Senate Majority Leader from Nevada. And Nevada has incredible track record of lawlessness on the political level. Let's face it. I mean, this is Las Vegas. So, you know, trying to say that Area 51 and all that stuff operated in a transparent fashion, Harry Reid is the guy who covered that, you know, and when there were lawsuits for the workers on Area 51, This is the guy who covered that up. And also, this is the guy who 13 times denied an audit of the Federal Reserve on the floor of the Senate. So this is not someone who's interested in transparency at all. That's the biggest joke.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take a quick look at what they've tried to do with Harry. They've tried to rebrand him as Disclosure Harry. This happened as soon as our friend Tom DeLonge crashed on Joe Rogan's show. Suddenly, we're starting to see articles like this. Harry Reid pushing for more UFO research and showing him as this kind of mysterious figure in sunglasses. And, someone said he had some condition, maybe he had to wear the sunglasses. Okay, but still, you didn't have to have the picture that way. So it's like, it's Mulder Harry Reid.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. But Harry Reid, as I've pointed out, blocked the audit of the Federal Reserve, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 13 times.
13 times?
So let's think about this. Do you think that someone like that wants transparency and wants to give you transparency around the most secret program in the entire world, the UFO file? I don't think so. But yet that's the narrative here. Now, just a little flashback here. House overwhelmingly passes audit the Fed, so why won't Harry Reid bring it to a vote? I'll tell you weird things about Harry Reid, too. In the 1990s, when he was a senator in Nevada, he used to fake out everybody saying that we need to get through this audit of the Fed, and he used to champion it. When it came up and Rand Paul wanted it, who's the son of Dr. Ron Paul, and Rand Paul being the senator from Kentucky, he blocked it. The obstacle was Harry Reid. And, eventually they got some kind of a phony trade-off, but we never got a full audit of the Federal Reserve. And now we have Mr. UFO Disclosure, supposedly, Harry Reid. Now, Harry Reid's gotten that nickname before, Dirty Harry, because of the deals that he's been involved with as Senate Majority Leader. And being the senator from Nevada, it's kind of hard not to, frankly. So that's all well and good. But nonetheless, that's what we're dealing with. That's the face of disclosure for this program. That's who Ttsa keeps going back to and saying, Harry Reid said it. Harry Reid said this thing about ATIP. The other 2 senators he supposedly set it up with, it's too bad. They're both dead, so we can't talk to them about it. Daniel Inouye passed away, and Senator Ted Stevens was in a plane crash. So that's very unfortunate that we can't talk to them about ATIP. But the Pentagon now has gone on record saying that Elizondo had no responsibilities in relation to it. Now, Brian Bender over at Politico got it in his head that he was somehow going to change this fact. And he said, this is complete BS. The Intercept article is wrong. And why are they questioning this and all the rest? And he said, they're all going to sing a different tune in a week because I'm going to get the Pentagon to go on record and say he was part of the program. And Ttsa backed him up. Yeah. And we had people like Alejandro Rojas at Open Minds who were like, yeah, just wait, it's coming. So Friday comes around, and in fact, the Pentagon does reissue a statement, but here's what they say. The Pentagon reinforces that Mr. Luis Elizondo had no responsibilities, quote, no responsibilities on ATIP. Senator Harry Reid's 2009 memo changes nothing. And this was a little kind of smoke and mirrors thing that George Knapp and Harry Reid figured out. They were like, let's show Elizondo's name on this memo, and, that'll change everything if these guys get into trouble. Well, it didn't change anything. That is the headline there. The article's at the Black Vault. I highly recommend reading it. But here's an interesting thing that happened. Bender and other people who were pushing this idea that Friday would see this retraction of the whole thing, they took down those tweets, which is like obfuscating evidence. But, on the internet, things live forever. So that's not going to work. So those predictions were wrong. You guys were wrong. And the Pentagon, who was supposedly now Luis Elizondo's boss, have said he had no responsibilities for ATIP. So now what? So now the entire Ttsa narrative that he was the leader of the ATIP Let's Analyze UFO Threat program goes out the window. None of that's true. He has no backup for it. So it's like, if you go to your boss and you say, I put you down on my resume and this is what I did for you, and someone calls up and checks on it, well, there you go. in this case, we checked on it, and what did the boss say? The boss said this guy had nothing to do with the ATIP program. Now, that would end an interview for a prospective client if you were in corporate America or any job, if someone lies on their application. But somehow it gets this guy a TV show, it gets millions of dollars for the Ttsa and fundraising, and it gets a green light through the mainstream media. What the hell's going on here? I'm going to read his article, but before I do, I want to again stress that today, Trump, in relation to the UFO file question that he was asked by Stephanopoulos, who was a Clinton insider, definitely trying to help this Podesta DeLonge narrative by asking him about the Navy UFO file aspect and not leaving it when President Trump was evasive and saying, you know, yeah, those guys are reporting things. I trust our guys, but I'm not very interested in the UFO file. They're trying to get this backup going. But now today, for the first time, we saw the real split in this story, which is the Trump Space Force side versus the phony CIA side. Now, the Trump Space Force side, we'll find out, has some issues too, because they want to make space a war-fighting domain, which is, by the way, the goal of both of these groups. But I do believe that the thing that's going on now is what we can expose. Let's get a little more of a handle on this political aspect involved with the Ttsa. Very interesting. Here we have Tom DeLonge in the Obama White House meeting with John Podesta, who was Obama's chief of staff, and then he was the head of the Hillary Clinton campaign. And in the middle, they have Peter Levenda, who's actually a very good author. And what happens? They actually came, as we've talked about, they came to Joseph Farrell and asked him to write a book. But I think because he was anti-Hillary Clinton, they didn't want him in the end. But they were talking about some real money. I mean, serious money, thousands and thousands of dollars. And what they got instead was Peter Levenda to do it. And he did a series of books. And, when the Ttsa talks about doing fiction books and fiction shows to educate the public, have at it. But when you monkey around with reality and you have a CIA executive board, you're going to get scrutinized. And that's the mistake that was made in relation to Ttsa. But as we can see with Podesta and DeLonge here, again, this is in relation to, this is before the election results. And this is what happened, which is they were setting up this idea to push this down everyone's throat with Clinton as president. Instead, Trump got in, totally different take on the UFO file, and a lot of people were just hanging in the wind. The extraordinary thing that they moved to do was to actually unleash the op to do it, but without the executive branch control. What did they need on their side instead? They went and turned to the media, and they said, the Central Intelligence Agency can control the media aspect on this. Now, anyone who's in the business and who knows reporters will tell you that the CIA can make or break a career because they can give you leaks from all over the world. They can tell you what's going on with the Iran tanker situation, which, by the way, I don't know if this has been so widely reported, but the Iran tanker situation, the owner of that boat that got blown up, he said, actually what I saw were flying objects. And in this case, since he didn't know what they were, guess it's unidentified flying objects. That's what he was seeing. I mean, this is extraordinary when you think about it. That's widely reported, by the way. That's not just something in some corner of the alternative media. That's something that you're seeing in every mainstream publication. And it brings us around again to this individual. And the title that they gave him for Ttsa, which is quite extraordinary, is Director of Global Security. Now, Ttsa is incorporated as an entertainment company. How can an entertainment company have a Director of Global Security? It's like calling me king of the world. Mm-hmm. How can he direct global security from an entertainment show? Doesn't make any sense. One thing that they've done, every time they bring up a UFO case now in the media, you always hear two things. Elizondo, one, and this grainy footage thing that they released for the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article, which was a big breakthrough because it was on the front page of the New York Times. Not to say that major media hasn't covered UFOs before. They have. But they've certainly ridiculed the subject dramatically. This little grainy footage, they've gotten really into showing quite a bit in relation to this. We've got the gimbal video and the Tic Tac video. But now they've reshaped it. So they try to reshape the name UAP, which comes from British defense files, unidentified aerial phenomena. So they're like, oh, we'll rebrand the name UAP, and we'll have this guy Lou, and he'll be like the big discloser. And then we'll have Tom DeLonge sell it to the millennials, and the CIA will be happy hanging out behind there for everyone. Well, let's meet the Ttsa for a minute. Am I just saying that they're a bunch of CIA operatives? Or is it a bunch of CIA operatives? Let's find out. Well, Tom DeLonge, he's the president of the company. And they call him interim CEO. I wonder what that's all about. But that's Tom. Interestingly enough, this is somebody I really want us to pay attention to. And this is all fair use. I just printed right off their site, which is public. That's Jim Semivan. Jim Semivan is one of the biggest CIA operators on record, with over 3 decades of experience with the Central Intelligence Agency in major operations. Jim Semivan is the co-founder and vice president of operations of the To the Stars Academy. So, co-founder and VP. That's pretty high level. That's like as high as you get, except for the CEO. And he's a 3 decades CIA agent. And he's beyond an agent, really. But let's see what they have to say about him. In 2007, Mr. Semivan founded the consulting firm after his retirement as a senior intelligence service member of the Central Intelligence Agency. Not a low-level operator or an asset, but a senior intelligence service member of the CIA. Now, the CIA, as we pointed out many times in this program, has a lot of problems with the truth. And Congress and the White House have repeatedly hauled them in to get the truth out of them, and at times have had to censure them, including in relation to their assassination of foreign leaders programs. Now, we go through this thing back and forth where we have a number of researchers like Professor Peter Dale Scott, UC Berkeley, who tracks how the CIA has been involved with these various assaults on the executive branch. And that the deep state is something that is a major piece of intelligence operations, and that the first major revolt of this Central Intelligence Agency was against President Kennedy, who was looking very much into how do we open up the UFO file in dealing with foreign governments first, quite possibly with the public later, but he's on record trying to get the UFO file opened to the Russians to avoid a nuclear incident. Makes sense. But the Central Intelligence Agency is an article of faith in their dedication to the wall of secrecy. Took President Kennedy as a national security threat because he was threatening this kind of fiefdom that they had going on. Now, since retirement, Mr. Semivan primarily worked as a consultant for the intelligence community on classified topics, including IC leadership training, CIA tradecraft training, countering weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Semivan retired from the CIA Directorate of Operations. Directorate. That's the highest level. After 25 years as an operations officer. Phenomenal. Both overseas and domestically. This is an incredibly heavy-duty player in the Central Intelligence Agency. Next up, Dr. Hal Puthoff. Who's keeping score here on the CIA aspect? Is the Ttsa loaded with CIA professionals, officials? So far, so good. Dr. Hal Puthoff, VP Science and Technology of Ttsa. Harold Putoff is the co-founder and vice president of science and technology, TTS Academy. Since 1985, Dr. Putoff has served as president and CEO of Earth Tech International. He's been involved since the 70s with central intelligence programs on remote viewing and all kinds of aerospace aspects. Dr. Putoff's professional background spans more than 5 decades of research with Sperry, GE, and SRI International. That's the Stanford Research Institute, which launched the, with the CIA, launched the remote viewing program. Dr. Putoff regularly advises NASA, the DoD, and the intelligence community on leading edge technologies and future technologies threats. This guy has worked with the central intelligence agencies since the early 70s. So more figures on the CIA side. Steve Justice, of course, Chief Operating Officer and Director of TTS Academy Aerospace Division. In going into his background now, he is somebody who has been the program director for advanced system at Lockheed Martin Advanced Development Programs, better known as Skunk Works. Now, Lockheed Martin is known in this program as the United States of Lockheed Martin because Secretary Fitz, the former assistant HUD secretary, has come on this program a number of times and said that when she tried to get an accounting of where the money was going in government, it was always Lockheed Martin who held the reins of where that money was going, even if you were dealing with HUD, which is absurd. They ruled the systems and they just would not give her the information. So Lockheed Martin has been hiding a lot and is one of the major aerospace companies that people like Jim Garrison identified as being involved in very deep operations around secrecy and assassination, and in particular in relation to the assassination of President Kennedy. So these types of military contractors, remember, we have to go all the way back to Eisenhower warning about the military-industrial complex getting too much of a hand on this. And indeed they have, and the warning has come up, full up. Next up, Luis Elizondo. Okay, Elizondo, career intelligence officer. They're not hiding it. Experience includes working with the Department of Defense, National Counterintelligence Executive, the Director of National Intelligence. I believe that would be James Clapper. We'll also are going to find John Brennan was in office during this guy's tenure. As an intelligence case officer, he ran clandestine source operations throughout Latin America and the Middle East. Most recently, Lewis managed the security for certain sensitive portfolios of the U.S. government as the director of the national programs. Okay, he also ran a sensitive aerospace threat identification program focusing on unidentified aerial technologies. No, he didn't. There's no proof anywhere that he ran that program. The Pentagon, who would have been his boss for doing that, has gone on record saying that he had no responsibilities for it. So that's a lie. So the question now becomes that the Pentagon's gone on record. Why are they lying? And why is the media mad at the Pentagon? And why is the media trying to hype this thing with Trump to try to get this weird weasel of a CIA operation through? Well, we might get some answers when we look at Chris Mellon. Now, I want to show you something in relation to Chris Mellon. By the way, you're watching the Dark Journalist program. We're going deep into Ttsa, and we're going to, show just how this company has been engaged in lying, and how they really have brought forward a narrative which is misleading and is really, when you get right down to it, it is so dark on the CIA side about what they're trying to do to co-opt the UFO file and create it as a threat program to then rifle the threat down everyone's throat. And we've discussed the whole von Braun alien threat scenario, the fake alien threat scenario, on this program recently with Professor Dr. Farrell. Now, Chris Mellon has a very interesting open door policy at the Washington Post. This is a guy who worked for George W. Bush, in defense intelligence, and he is from the Mellon family, which is the famous financial banking family. And now he just gets to write op-eds in the Washington Post because, of course, the Washington Post is a CIA operation through and through, and has been since its days with Ben Bradley and Katharine Graham. I mean, they've always been an instrument of that, but now Jeff Bezos owns it, so you really know it's going on. In any case, Mellon, he writes these articles about UFOs and the threats that they pose and all the rest of it, and it's just carte blanche because, you know, hey, he's writing about it, and the Washington Post is like, write your op-ed. So the press releases for Ttsa, the point is, he works for Ttsa. So any of his articles are completely suspect because he's promoting what the company, that's what they also call the CIA. So his background: Christopher Mellon is a private equity investor, political commentator, and the chair of the science committee at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. He served 20 years in the federal government, including Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Clinton and Bush administrations. And that's W. Bush. In addition, he's worked for many years in Capitol Hill, Senate Select Committee, and all the rest of it. Now, he also has been involved with Special Operations Command. He's had multiple awards from U.S. Intelligence community, and this guy is somebody that they're pushing out there a lot. Now, remember what the intelligence aspects around the W administration got us: the war in Iraq, okay? And this was in a threat assessment that they gave, that Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons and that we had to take him out. So we went in there on this after 9/11, dragged in. And it was guys like Mellon who were part of the intelligence teams. Let's think about that. So can we trust the CIA and these intelligence figures around really important issues? Or have they lied in the past and been wrong in the past? And has that lie been because of their closer relationships with Wall Street and with the oil companies and all the rest of it? These are the things that need to be looked at, those interconnected relationships. Being in the CIA immediately, it's first of all, the CIA is an extra constitutional force, and anyone who's examined it can see that they've gone way beyond their mandate. As a matter of fact, the man who set it up, President Harry Truman, after President Kennedy was assassinated, said it either needs to be reformed or scrapped in a famous op-ed that he gave a month to the day after Kennedy was assassinated. And the idea is that he set it up just to get intelligence from different countries and different things that were going on so that the president could look at those things. Instead, they got their own Air Force. They started to run their own ops. And by the time we get to President Kennedy, he spends literally 3 years trying to get that power back to the executive branch. And Eisenhower, who'd been through a number of things, including a stroke while in office, he really lost control of the picture. And we've been suffering with the CIA's overreach ever since. This is dramatic CIA overreach. I can put it to you that way. But they're so wrapped up in so many different areas for us. Okay, I have to go through this just to be fair, to say, because when I say it's a CIA operation, I really want to prove it, and then we can move on to other things. Dr. Noam Khan, National Security and Program Management Consultant for Ttsa. Again, why they need a national security consultant for an entertainment company that's incorporated as Entertainment LLC. Okay, well, let's find out. Dr. Noam Khan is currently a consultant on national security for the U.S. government with a focus on preventing the use of biological weapons or mass destruction. Dr. Khan has over a 30-year, that's 3 decades, 30-year career with the Central Intelligence Agency. These are their top people. They're all CIA professionals. They're all CIA officials. Why is the CIA so deep in Ttsa? What the hell's going on here? His past honors include a certification of commendation from the Central Intelligence Agency for significant contributions to the mission of the Office of Research and Development. This guy's a heavy, heavy hitter for the Central Intelligence Agency. Another one. So they didn't go and handpick a couple of guys. They've got a staff of the top CIA people running this thing. Where are they going with it? All right, so I think we've established that now. So now if you see a troll that says they're not CIA, now you know better. Am I right or am I right, Miss Olivia?
Oh, sorry. I'm just getting rid of a troll.
Yeah, there you go. How are you doing over there?
Good. Everybody is starting to notice you're wearing a gray suit. Your summer suit.
Well, this is a little Saturday splash. Now, here's the interesting thing. Well, everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist program, and this is a very special bonus episode, which let's just say that certain things were coming, and they were coming up, and there were ways and means that we were hearing about them. And so today, when the president went on the record rebuffing this whole Stephanopoulos version of like, hey, what about the Navy thing, and trying to get it into Ttsa so they could tie that together, and Trump saying, oh no, I'm not going there. This was a very significant moment, and it's the first time it happened, and we see now Stephanopoulos, major Clinton insider, trying to corral this situation to their favor. What is the media and the Clinton op up to in relation to the UFO file running through the Ttsa with their CIA friends, who, by the way, have spent the last 2 years trying to remove a sitting president under a false narrative of Russian collusion? Regardless of what you think of Trump or Clinton, the fact that the CIA could decide on its own to create a narrative to get rid of somebody that they didn't want is downright unconstitutional. Well, think about it. The CIA is an extra constitutional force. They're not envisioned in the Constitution at all. So they're not operating under constitutional rules. And this is one of the big problems that we have in America today. All right, next up, what else was happening? Ttsa, remember, was getting hammered now. Intercept, picking up on all the things we've been reporting on for the last 18 months. Where is this thing going? Where did it come from? John Greenwald put together a timeline of misstatements, lies, and outright deception. Next up, we had this very interesting article come out. Tom DeLonge's origin story for To the Stars Academy describes a government UFO info operation. DeLonge is either lying and his company can't be trusted, or dark areas of the military-industrial complex had a direct hand in its founding. That's Tyler Rogaway. And I have to say, under aviation intel, this guy really does a good job. Key players on the To the Stars, this is from the article by Mr. Rogaway. Key players on the To the Stars Academy team, a group with curiously impressive resumes from the intelligence, military, industrial, and intelligence complex highest rungs and darkest corners. Yes, I agree. Are virtually everywhere in the media right now. In what has been one of the most impressive media pushes I have seen in a long time, the group has gone all out in promoting their new show, Unidentified. Now, isn't it interesting that all these things about Navy protocols and the Trump aspect and all the things that they're pushing, isn't it interesting that it's all happening as they're debuting this new show, Unidentified, on the History Channel? Yes, Miss Olivia.
I'm sorry, Giovanni Delgado just said, did y'all see Tom DeLonge's tweet this morning claiming Italian intelligence gave pics proving a UFO shot down a military helicopter? Did you see this?
It's interesting. A lot of people are still checking that out, but I'm not convinced by DeLonge's tweet that is anything important.
No, but it does back up the idea. Threat, right? And so now they've got to prove that there's an actual threat.
Yes.
It's not
excellent
just
point.
conjecture.
Excellent point. I am going to look, I'm definitely going to see the source of that particular video. But if you can email me at info@darkjournalist.com, any info that you have about it, that would be outstanding. But that's good. I'm glad he got that in there. Okay, a little bit more. They're promoting the show Unidentified on the History Channel. At the same time, as if right on cue, which isn't all that surprising, huge UFO-related stories have hit the mainstream media. This is true. It's in combination. It's Christmas for Elizondo and company. That's important. These have included on-the-record accounts of Navy fighter pilots recently encountering UFOs, and an announcement of the service's own rule changes regarding how personnel report these incidents. We have gone in depth on each of these stories in an attempt to cut through the static and get to the truth, or at least the possibilities surrounding what could end up being the truth. Now, this article by Tyler Rogaway for Aviation Intel, the War Zone is the name of the publication, but this is very important. This also hit, and it started to, again, bring cracks in that wall of secrecy around the TTSA and bring down the whole narrative. This is what's important. So let's keep rolling, and keeping in mind that DeLonge has been selected as something they call the Bobo in intelligence circles. And the Bobo is an interesting thing. It relates to a series of psychological experiments that the CIA did in the 60s and 70s. But basically, the Bobo is somebody that they roll out who doesn't know that they're being used to get data. And they roll them out and put them up there as the figurehead. Now, a lot of people have said this in relation to Tom DeLonge. Well, he doesn't know that he's being used and all the rest of it. Okay, granted, it could very well be true, but I got to tell you, at a certain point, you're an adult, you're a millionaire, and you have the ability to say, I'm being used or whatever. And you don't perpetuate the lie, especially if people like good journalists had to bring that truth to you. You start to deal with it. You don't hide behind some ivory tower saying that's to the stars and we have TV shows and books, but leave us alone. Don't ask us any tough questions. As he had said, I'm not going to answer any controversial questions. Well, what good is it? What's the whole point of this operation if you guys are just as lack the transparency that you're supposedly accusing the government of lacking in the first place? In fact, if you're afraid and trying to tear down the wall of secrecy and you feel that the government hasn't given you the answers, then why do you have a bunch of government people on your staff? Why do you have the CIA, the most secretive agency of all, the most deceptive of all, leading your organization? It doesn't make any sense. So they have elected him as the Bobo, and he's played the role quite well. Now let's get into the political side a little bit here. Yes.
Didn't Tom use the money for a supposed tour or something like this?
Oh yeah. Well, this is we're going to get into that with the SEC filing, which is the Angels and Airwaves tour and all that. They're kind of going through that and saying, well, this is part of what we're spending the TTSA money on. I mean, fine, you can run your own company any way you want to, but really, I mean, would you expect if you were investing in TTSA that the Angels and Airwaves money is coming out of that too? You know, this is very strange merging of things here. How about keeping it clean? How about keeping the CIA out of it for the UFO community especially? But really just a lot of inappropriate things going on here, including the incredible amounts of money that are going around. That company is $50 million in debt. Can you imagine $50 million in the independent community? Think about that. What kind of influence does that get you? It's absurd. How do you spend $50 million in a year in the UFO community? Think about that. All right, let's keep rolling. Of course, the whole thing could be a gigantic engineered loss that somebody can write off in some back room somewhere. We can't be beyond that either. Clinton campaign chair John Podesta says the American people can handle the truth on UFOs. Boy, does CNN love this guy. Podesta, of course, as Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, I'm going to be fair here. There's a lot of things about John Podesta that I could say, but what I'm going to say at least here is that he represents the real link to the Clinton administration, what was going to be the Clinton administration, the Clinton election team of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and Tom DeLonge. And suddenly we saw Hillary Clinton, before she got into her whole deplorable phase, she was going around talking about UAP when she would go on Jimmy Kimmel or any of those other late night shows, and really just talking like she didn't know what she was talking about. But they made her say UAP. And again, now we're seeing this whole rush through the media. Don't use UFO anymore. Use UAP. You know, get that new fragrance by the TTSA. Mm-hmm. It's not Louis Elizondo now. What is it, Olivia?
It's Lou.
It's Lou. The new fragrance from TTSA. So they're getting a lot of marketing advice as we go along here. Okay. Pentagon reinforces Mr. Louis Elizondo had no responsibilities on ATIP. Senator Harry Reid's 2009 memo changes nothing. That comes out of the Pentagon. John Greenwald reporting the Black Vault. Nearly 2 weeks ago, the Intercept published a Pentagon denial about the involvement of Mr. Louis Elizondo and his widespread claims about heading a secret Pentagon UFO program, known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. Now, newly received statements from the Pentagon issued to the Black Vault specifically address a 2009 Harry Reid memo, again, Senator Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader from Nevada, retired. a 2009 Harry Reid memo that's being offered by some supporters as proof of Mr. Elizondo's alleged leadership of the program, yet it is now revealed that the existence of this document does not alter the Pentagon's original position about his claims. Pentagon spokesperson Susan Goff stated, "I can confirm that the memo you're referring to is authentic, but it makes no change to previous statements that Mr. Elizondo had no assigned responsibilities for ATIP while he was in the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence." This is his entire claim. They're refuting him on record again. Her statement comes amid a firestorm of controversy when on June 1st, 2019, as reported by Mr. Keith Clore, the Pentagon had also said, in part, Mr. Elizondo had no responsibilities with regard to the ATIP program while he was working at the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence up until the time he resigned, effective 10/4/2017, when he went off and danced over to the Stars Academy, claiming that he led this program and that he was disgruntled and had to get it out to the public. Well, there's nothing to back that up. The Pentagon has said that you're full of it. So, their whole claim about To the Stars Academy is they have all this expertise because he ran the ATIP program. But there's no proof that he ran the ATIP program. So what's going on? I'm going to move on from that one. So who was it who was leading this whole thing when it came out? Who were the journalists? And what's their background, and why did they get behind the Ttsa so quickly? Why was there no real investigation done? Why wasn't Luis Elizondo vetted properly? Sure, the guy worked for the Pentagon, I can tell you that. But he didn't have any of the credentials that he was talking about. Why not? Why didn't the New York Times do it? Why didn't Politico do it? Well, let's look at Brian Bender. Now, remember this little part where I said, you know, we had these people predicting things. Let's look at Brian Bender's tweet after the Intercept article came out. He says, quote, "I'd stay tuned for a much more definitive statement from the Pentagon this week. The Intercept's assertions and innuendo, it never definitely reported anything, were wrong. It did report something. It reported that Elizondo, according to the Pentagon, never headed the ATIP program, which is a big lie that the Ttsa put out, and is the whole foundation of the authority, supposed authority of Elizondo on the subject." He says they were wrong, and the issue should be settled once and for all, though with this crowd, I won't count on it. That's right. People who don't believe the CIA. Gee, they only lied us into the Iraq war. You know, they've only lied for 55 years and covered up the JFK assassination, continuing to hold records. But no, with this crowd, I wouldn't count on it. Yeah, Brian, I wouldn't count on it. Well, as it turns out, Mr. Bender has since deleted this tweet sometime after it was pointed out that the Pentagon statement was not issued the week that he claimed. Mr. Bender declined to comment on why he deleted the tweet. Although no correction has been made by the Pentagon, as hoped for by some, including Dr. Puthoff, co-founder of the To the Stars Academy, where Elizondo is now employed, Puthoff offered his support to counter the Pentagon's assertions. This is what they do now. Real stuff comes out, and then they're like, they'll roll out George Knapp, and he'll be like, oh, I have this memo that Harry Reid gave me 5 years ago, and it says Elizondo's name in a corner here. See? And then over and over again, we have this little back and forth going on where they try to rescue Ttsa. Why? Why, when Ttsa is going down, why won't you let them hit rock bottom so we get the truth? Why are you trying to save them? What's in it for you? Bender? What's in it for you? George Knapp? What's in it for you, Leslie Kean? Knapp and Kean are some of the greatest UFO journalists that ever came down the pike. Who roped them into this? And who's getting them to play defense for an obvious lie? Let's find out. Dr. Puthoff, again, 4 decades with the CIA remote viewing program also, co-founder of To the Stars Academy, offered his support to counter the Pentagon's assertion. When asked for documented proof of any evidence to the contrary, Dr. Putoff only issued the following statement to the Black Vault. I've been following all the buzz back and forth concerning Elizondo's role in ATIP and recognize there are a number of misunderstandings for reasonable reasons, given the public doesn't have detailed access to daily activities and Pentagon projects. Well, Elizondo said it wasn't classified. So, in fact, it's supposed to be that we have all the details about it. It's not classified. That's what Elizondo said. I have no problem asserting that as an ASWAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, ATIP contractor, and senior advisor, I continue to attend meetings, provide briefings, gain access for videos, provided proposed program plans, meet with the staff, etc., all under the aegis of Elizondo's leadership and responsibility for maintaining continuity of the program effort and goals until he resigned. Back to the article. It's unclear how Dr. Putoff could have worked under Mr. Elizondo's leadership, since ASWAP ATIP contracted work began in 2008 at DIA, and Mr. Elizondo's alleged leadership began in 2010 at the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence when the program was transferred. When asked about this discrepancy and to clarify that the contracted work by Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, LLC, that's Bigelow, the millionaire over there who runs Bigelow Aerospace, who's involved in all this. He won the contract, by the way. He got the $22 million from his pal, Harry Reid. When asked about this discrepancy, or to clarify that the contracted work by Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, LLC, who won the initial contract, continued after 2 years or after the 2012 date when funding was cut entirely, Dr. Putoff did not return the message because he can't answer the question, apparently. Whenever they get into this tough spot, somebody comes forward and says, can you answer this? And they run for the hills. They're there behind the ivory tower of Ttsa. They have to come down here in the street, and we have to basically blow away the ivory tower and get the truth. This is BS. This is CIA counterintelligence propaganda aimed at the American people and the world. And the journalists who are lining up with this are disgracing themselves because we have good journalists going into it, and these people can't refute what they're saying, and the Pentagon now can't refute what they're saying. So why are they going along with it? Let's keep going. So Knapp went to bat, of course, for these guys through Senator Reid, and of course it's always Senator Reid. And Senator Reid actually went out this week talking about, oh, we need UFO disclosure, and giving all these radio interviews. And as I pointed out, we don't have any proof that Harry Reid is transparency. He's the guy who blocked the audit of the Federal Reserve multiple times, and he is the senator who, he's participated in so many different things on a political level that have to do with the secrecy of Area 51. Why do we assume, why would anyone assume that this guy wanted transparency around the UFO file? They don't, but they do want the narrative, and they want it to look like the truth. And this is what we're going to blow away here today. But somebody I really want to point out in all this mess is Brian Bender. Now, when I was doing the research around Brian Bender, that's when I got the word that my video wouldn't stay up if I got into this. Now,
how did that come?
Well, there's ways and means when you do journalistic study, and I was passed that information that for some reason this was going to kind of get the kibosh on my report. Well, let's see if that holds true. I have, the minute the recording goes down, I have it backed up and we'll make it available in case anything happens to it. But I want to say something about Bender and his background. This is, again, from the level of investigative journalist to investigative journalist. It's not personal, but when you get into this, real investigative journalism, as I've pointed out multiple times, can be adversarial, and it can't ever be personal because that's not professional. However, when we look into Bender's past, and we look into what his specialty is if he's being utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency in this whole factor, it goes back to President Kennedy. Now, the CIA had it in for President Kennedy when he got into office in 1960. He won. In 1961, he was sworn in, and he battled for 3 years with the CIA, especially around the idea of transparency in government. Now, oddly enough, Bender's beat has been to spin the Kennedy records and the things that have come forward in a negative fashion, after the fashion that a CIA journalist, someone who was under the sway of the Central Intelligence Agency, would be reporting these facts. Boston Globe staff, okay, Brian Bender, or darker corner of Camelot. Remember, the CIA's biggest problem, their major problem, is the fact that they're associated with the Kennedy assassination. This is their biggest Achilles heel because they covered it up after the fact. There have been 55 years of research in relation to this. But here we have Bender talking about a dark corner of Camelot. Stacked in a vault in the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library Museum in Dorchester, individually sealed and labeled, are 54 crates of records so closely guarded that even the library director is prohibited from taking a peek. Well, you might think these are records by the Central Intelligence Agency covering up something. But no, this whole story gives us the idea that the Kennedys were trying to assassinate Castro, and they were mad dogs who were just sending people in to assassinate him, and that they're holding the records back, and that that's the dark corner of Camelot. And they go into such ridiculous detail about Robert Kennedy and how the CIA were trying to get these things to come out, you know, and how the CIA are the disclosure heroes, but hey, the Kennedys are filthy because they tried to kill Castro. Well, gee, who was engaged actually in the Kill Castro program? That's all CIA. And what did the President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy try to shut down? The Kill Castro program. So that whole spin of a darker corner of Camelot is Brian Bender's beat. And they spin that and pick it up through the Atlantic and other articles, pump off this article that Brian Bender reported on the Kennedy family's tight-fisted and iron-willed efforts to keep the official papers of Robert F. Kennedy's dark secrets. Not the CIA's secret, Robert Kennedy's dark secrets, okay? What's the name of the article? Shame on the Kennedys. We getting an idea where Brian Bender's coming from? I think we're getting an idea where Brian Bender's coming from. On this program, we've talked a lot about President Kennedy's struggles with the Central Intelligence Agency and their extra constitutional forces, especially in relation to, at the end of his life, the fact that he wanted to open up the UFO file. And we've shown those documents. We've got Bender, who's an expert on not going after the CIA in relation to this, but going after the Kennedys. Sound like a good person to help get CIA disclosure in the door? Sounds like it to me. President Kennedy said he was going to smash the Central Intelligence Agency into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. A lot of people feel that they got to him first. So we have this guy who has this background. Now let's think of it this way. We have the CIA who wants to settle an old score so that they get their credibility back, one. Two, they've been working up to CIA disclosure so they can develop a threat program so that they can have Congress allocate millions of dollars for this threat program. They work on it. They try it through different programs with people like Ron Pandolfi and with others for years. They can't quite get it to happen. They come up with this idea of working with an entertainment company and a Bobo, Tom DeLonge. They roll it out, and they bring all their high-end CIA people to the fore. Those people lean on the press and on the media. The media gets instructions to start talking about the UFO threat problem. No disclosure. The disclosure is just about a threat. You don't get to hear anything about, is it an off-world civilization? They won't go into that. They just want you to think it's a threat and it's out there. It's pretty interesting when you start to look at the figures behind it who launched it. Let's look at another figure behind it. Bender kept saying something odd in his reporting that the Pentagon had said in 2017 for the New York Times and all the rest of it, that Elizondo did head this program up. Well, let's find out how that worked. Now, this is from the Intercept's article. Bender, who we just met, the guy who likes to trash the Kennedys. As it happens, Bender, who is Politico's defense editor, had a recurring role in the first episode of Unidentified. He earned himself by promoting Ttsa. He got into the TV show. We're going to find out others have been rewarded with such Ttsa bounty. He appeared on camera numerous times as a kind of authoritative character witness for Elizondo, Mellon, and the UFO investigations. Well, now it's starting to add up. Quote, this is a Bender quote. If you were trying to come up with the A-team of former high-level government officials who would come forward on this issue, you can't really think of a better team, Bender says in the screener. Lou, Elizondo, Chris Mellon, these guys still have security clearances, still have networks in Washington, still are in the business, if you will. Well, at least he's admitting that they're still in the CIA. The last part sounds like a cryptic reference to contract work they might be doing for a U.S. intelligence agency or some other government entity. Elizondo confirmed to me earlier this year that he is in fact working as a government contractor, but it's not what you think it is, he said. Mellon did not respond to my request for comment. He's also working still for the government. The intelligence people are still paying their bills and calling the shots with what they're doing with Ttsa. In the feverish UFO community in which conspiracy theories have long thrived, some suspect that DeLonge is being played like a useful idiot, a bobo, and that his To the Stars Academy is a front for some kind of black ops. If he's not a stooge, he's certainly an odd figure for Mellon and Elizondo to hitch their wagons to. So then they go into the whole origin story of the To the Stars Academy. What I find interesting, however, and I need to find this. Miss Olivia, you can actually...
you want a question?
Well, actually, I'm going to read this real quick. And
Okay.
we're going to get into questions. It's going to be a little tricky tonight. We're going to take questions live on the fly. And we're going to get into them in about 10 minutes here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist program. We're going deep into Ttsa and this disclosure cult that's been launched by the CIA on the public. Through the means of entertainment, but the media has been picking it up as the real thing and trying to distort the issue. It's a really big problem, and the people around the independent media really need to get with it, and that'll shut down so much of the junk that we see on the mainstream media, including the fact of people like Stephanopoulos trying to get Trump to kind of support this phony CIA disclosure. Okay, now, the person who gave the information originally about Elizondo heading the program to the New York Times and to Politico's Brian Bender is someone named Dana White, who worked at the Pentagon. She confirmed to Politico that the program existed and was run by Elizondo, and this is what Brian Bender wrote in December 2017. Earlier this year, White, a Trump administration political appointee, resigned amid an internal probe into charges of misconduct. So the entire Elizondo ran ATIP program hangs on this one person who's working with Brian Bender, who has an axe to grind for the CIA, apparently. And they resigned because they were being charged by an internal probe with misconduct. Pentagon spokesperson Christopher Sherwood told me that he cannot confirm White's statement. As it happens, Bender, who is Politico's defense editor, had a recurring role in the first episode of Unidentified. So Unidentified is a kind of a clearinghouse. It's giving out those rewards. And Bender's role was to move it through legitimate media. And Dana White's role was the fact that she actually worked inside the Pentagon. But they used her, and then by the time anyone went to her to get any further information on it, she'd already been taken out of the picture by a misconduct query. She'd resigned. So that doesn't back anything up, because if she was into misconduct, that's not a good character witness. So what do you got? Harry Reid. George Knapp's relationship with Harry Reid. Nevada, Las Vegas. Bob Bigelow. Bigelow Aerospace, Nevada. Las Vegas. The CIA, Las Vegas, billionaire money.
While you're on that,
Yes.
someone was asking, Bigelow and Harry Reid are both Mormons. Is there a Mormon connection in all this?
Well, the only thing I can say in relation to that is that the Mormon church, unfortunately, has this incredibly tight relationship all the way back for decades with the Central Intelligence Agencies. And the whole CIA connection with the Mormons is huge.
Why?
Well, it goes deep, and I will say that it's kind of a different question, but it does run deep, and it is very easy to source when you go through, even when you go through Watergate, you're going to find all these key people involved in Watergate were Mormons who were connected with the CIA. And when they went into those records, because they had it as part of a federal grand jury looking into this, they had to reveal those connections. And the CIA, it turns out, had that kind of deep interlocking relationship with the Mormons. The Mormons, as a lot of religious organizations do, always have deep ties to intelligence agencies because the intelligence agencies use them and rely on them and utilize them around the world. So that's where those relationships develop. I don't think that they're healthy relationships at all, but I'm not trying to blame the Mormon Church for any of this. What I'm trying to say really is that in Las Vegas, with the political scene and with the money scene of Bigelow, it's not that Bigelow is the villain. It's just that he's a billionaire, and if he has an objective, a business objective, then he can work through his friend. Like Harry Reid was his good friend, and Harry Reid got him the deal for $22 million. Apparently, there were no other bidders, which is quite extraordinary if you think about it, because there's usually at least a dozen bidders for any government contract. Suddenly, Bigelow was the only bidder for it. There's a lot of things here that suggest not only that we're looking at a situation where we're being fed a false narrative, but that it's been planned out for a number of years, and that they were waiting for the right moment, and their right moment was coming in with DeLonge and Podesta into the Clinton White House, and that they would finally get their hands and apprehend the UFO file and use the UFO threat activity. Instead, they got Trump in office, but the op still existed. And now Trump is not going along with the Navy CIA version of this. And this is what the media wants, so much so that they got Stephanopoulos, the big Clinton insider, pushing it out. And we have people like Bender helping to carry that out and not questioning it like a real journalist would. So we got real problems on this story, but we in the independent media cannot support the junk, and we can't get behind CIA disclosure. And the good people, the good researchers, and you know who you are in the UFO field, you cannot give tepid, lukewarm support to Ttsa. It's not going to fly. These guys are their operations coming down, and it's going to be exposed for what it is. And then if they want to go off and, have the CIA go back and say, well, we were trying it off, it didn't work, and DeLonge goes off and does an entertainment company, fine. But it's not going to work like this. This phony idea that Ttsa is in charge of the UFO file and that Elizondo is some kind of disclosure hero. He's a CIA counterintelligence agent. He's on a mission. He's still connected to the government, according to his own testimony. Too bad no real journalist asked him any tough questions like, are you still employed by the intelligence agencies, even as a contractor? Somehow that one slipped their mind. while they were talking about all the dramatic risks that Mr. Elizondo was taking. Well, the biggest risk that they took with Elizondo was that their setup didn't quite work without the executive branch being on board with it. That's why the Pentagon story is falling apart. That's why the story of Ttsa is bogus. And that's why it can be rooted out, and the people who try to launch the fraud on the public and the journalists who assisted them in that effort should be shown up. So at the very least, you know, people like DeLonge, people like Elizondo, I've invited them on this show. They know it. They run for the hills if somebody's going to ask real questions. Just ask John Greenwald, who everyone knows is the most fair journalist who's looking for disclosure anywhere, and he knows all about the FOIA requests. He knows all about ATIP. He's the one who helped us get those things down and the facts locked in. If they run from him, you know they got problems. And who do they kiss up to? Who do they shout out to when they do their conferences? Well, those people, interestingly enough, are the ones who print their press releases verbatim. So I'm not so much interested in, you know, talking about the personal character of the journalists involved or of the people running the operation. What I am interested in, and what I am going to do, is bring before the public the fact that the Ttsa, the To the Stars Academy, is a CIA, a creature of the Central Intelligence Agency. And that a lot of people in the alternative field especially know that. Certainly on the mainstream side they do, because they're taking their marching orders from the Central Intelligence Agency. And we're getting bogus threat propaganda on the UFO side from the Ttsa, from the mainstream media on this. That's what we have to nip in the bud. It's very dangerous. And the idea of coming into the UFO field, coming into the UFO idea through this threat window that's run by the CIA, these are the guys who gave us the Iraq War with the phony WMDs. They don't get that role. And the kind of false flags and things that they could run with the UFO file, with the media on their side, the compromised CIA-loving media, like Stephanopoulos, who's a deep, deep Clinton operator. You know, this is not the kind of thing that's going to bring transparency in a truth community. So we've put it out there. We've identified the players. You know, the lie is over. So the Intercept has called it out. The Black Vault's called it out. The Drive has called it out. So many others have called it out. Well, let's look at just briefly Elizondo's former boss. This is something interesting that came out. John Brennan, you know, was caught lying multiple times when he was CIA director under the Obama administration during the time when Elizondo claims he was in government, working on these special programs and working regularly with the CIA. Well, here's the man at the top, CIA Director Brennan. Now, he was known as the Drone King because he would do this process of droning 50 people at a wedding to try to get at one terrorist. And in the process, creating multiple terrorists and just saying, well, that's the order of business. Even the Obama administration couldn't stomach him at the end. But this is also one of the key players in the whole Russiagate narrative, who was whoring himself out to MSNBC every other day, which is very odd because intelligence guys, especially directors, do not like to be out there. Their job is to stay quiet and behind the scenes. So here's an article from 2014 that says, private apologies are not enough for a defender of torture. The architect of America's drone program and the most talented liar in Washington, the nation's top spy, needs to go. There was a huge groundswell to get rid of this guy for his lying about the drone program. That is from, because, you know, these magazines and newspapers, The Independent in the UK, they were worried about it. This guy comes forward and says, you know, this is Brennan, we should find out more about that UFO file. comes out publicly as a CIA director and talks about it, backing up the whole TTSA narrative. But when we think about Elizondo's time in office, this is the man he had to report to if he's working for the CIA. John Brennan, the major player in the Russian collusion story, the major player in trying to remove a sitting president, like him or not, the CIA engaging in trying to get rid of a president sounds a lot like the JFK assassination. Sounds a lot like the kind of role that they've played comfortably in the past. And there we are again. So we've had a number of these very unusual things. Let's look just real briefly at the money part. DeLonge responds to the report that his UFO organization has accumulated $37 million worth of debt. That was back in October. They added another close to $50 million in debt by April of this year. That's a lot of money. That's blackmailable money. And in this field, it's off the charts because in the independent media and in the UFO area, touting $50 million for anything is, it literally, you can kind of get anything done that you need to get done. So that type of money is off the charts for this kind of a field. And they're saying, well, we're spending the money on shows and all the rest of it, $50 million in debt. That kind of money buys you a lot of influence in a field like this. And if the CIA wanted to rifle their narrative through this community, that's the kind of thing that they would do. Now, they have access to that kind of money. But the truth is, what we're looking at here is an incredible squeeze play of the intelligence agencies, big money, dirty politicians, and some compromised journalists. It's all on record. Everything that I've said comes directly from these reports. There's nothing that I've had to invent here except that my own personal opinion, backed up by the record, is that the Central Intelligence Agency's major Achilles heel is the fact that they assassinated President Kennedy and got away with it. But it's held against them because in the public imagination, the public still doesn't believe. 70% don't believe the official phony story of Oswald in a window with an old gun, who just happened to get lucky enough that President Kennedy was driving by the window. The magic bullet story the CIA put out, that's a joke now. We know it's pop culture. It's a punchline for something that's not possible. So I think it holds them. The Kennedy thing still holds them. That's why they don't release those records 55 years later, which is extraordinary, especially since Congress mandated it in 1992 that they had to give it to us in 2017. And we did an HBO special on this very fact, on this very point. So looking for those records to come out, the CIA blocked them. So what we're looking at is an extraordinary situation, and the TTSA has to come forward. They have to confess what they were up to, one, what the lies are about, and they need to, throw all the CIA people out of that company if they're going to go forward and have any kind of credibility, because, and also the mainstream media has incredible things to account for. The New York Times going along with the fake story of Elizondo and the ATIP program. Now, ATIP certainly existed, but they've had programs like that. This is no great surprise. This is the other kind of extraordinary thing, which is even Blue Book, was a government program about UFOs. We've had them before. This idea that this is a new thing, this is a breakthrough. Wow, I mean, it's always interesting to hear about what the government's doing it, because the government and the aerospace contractors are so deep in the secrecy wall and the deep state control, the political controls around the UFO file, so extraordinary. That it is a major geopolitical football. And when you see an action like this, trying to get everyone hooked on this idea of the UFO thing as a threat, it's extraordinarily dangerous, and it's the call to war, and it's the implication also is about war in space. So this is an incredibly dangerous push that needs to be pushed back, and the kind of cult activity that they've created around TTSA as these phony liberators who are somehow going to give us, UFO truth and all the rest of it. And, Elizondo is the disgruntled, Pentagon official who needed to get the truth out instead of the CIA counterintelligence man who was under orders and still works for them. And who the Pentagon now says didn't head the program. These are the facts. That's not me saying that. That's the Pentagon. Ask Christopher Sherwood at the Pentagon if Elizondo headed the ATIP program. He didn't. So this is where we are. And so what I want to do now is take some questions with you guys, and then we're going to wrap it up because I know that there are other things going on. We'll take a few questions, Miss Olivia.
Okay. Groovy has sent you a bunch of questions in DM and Twitter.
Oh, hey.
If you would. But I'm going to ask you
Okay.
just from what I know right now,
Yeah.
what I remember. So as far as the journalists go who are covering this story, what, other than money, what do you think their motivation is to back the Ttsa and defend it so fiercely?
Well, I think whenever you do journalism, there's always an influence question, especially when you get into a role at like a New York Times or a Politico or something like that. A lot of those guys, the CIA can make or break your career. Let's remember that. They can give you a story and really position you properly. And so therefore, if you go against that, and if you go against the Council on Foreign Relations influence, which they will pull to try to get a story, a narrative going out there. Look at the Russian collusion one. They'll pull those strings, and if you don't go along with it, or if you're covering, something, a story, a really major story, and you're kind of getting a breakthrough. Let's say you found out something about the CIA that wasn't so pretty, like how they're covering up the Kennedy assassination 55 years later. Just ask Jefferson Morley, who's in court with them right now. Who worked formerly for the Washington Post, by the way. What happens is you get into a situation where they'll deny you the access if you don't do them the favor. And if you're denied the access, after a while, it's very difficult to be a competitive journalist. Now, there are other things, of course, that they can entice into the picture that we can imagine and that we've heard stories about, including money, influence,
and being an insider.
And being an
knowing
insider.
The truth.
Yeah, and I'm sure, when I think about somebody like Knapp, who's done extraordinary work in the UFO field, the fact that he's going along, if you're best friends with Harry Reid and Bigelow, you're kind of squeezed. That's squeeze play. And unfortunately, his journalistic ethics didn't rise to the challenge when the Elizondo phony story came out. And maybe he thought, this is how we'll do it. This is how it's going to move forward, etc. But it's a lie. The story's a lie, and it's a CIA manipulation. And a lot of these journalists, when I was first looking into it in college, a lot of these guys were the ones that taught me, you don't trust the Central Intelligence Agency with the UFO file. So maybe I'm some kind of weird reminder for them in a way of how they used to operate. But I certainly don't trust the CIA with the UFO file. That's a fact.
I think it must be incredibly tempting, not just to learn the truth behind the veil, but also to be a part of disclosure. This could be very enticing. And, if they had a sales pitch, you're going to be a part of it. This is how it's going to roll out.
Yes.
And it's going to validate all of your work leading up to this. People, they don't want to die without knowing the truth and without seeing people absorb the truth.
So the ends justify the means.
Yes.
That's what they're thinking. And you made a really incredible observation a couple of weeks ago, which I want to give incredible kudos to you, Miss Olivia, for this, which is you said people have been going along with it because they've been kept on the fringes of it, and they want that ability to sit down with a relative at Thanksgiving and say, aha, the New York Times said it's real.
I can see that in the comments. People are so excited, that now they're getting some respect for once in their life. Okay, moving on.
Yes.
So where does Russia and China fit into disclosure and these fake Ttsa soft disclosures? So is this partly that they have their own space programs now,
Yes.
and the U.S. is worried that disclosure is going to be controlled by a foreign agency?
Yeah, excellent. You just actually answered your own question. Nicely done. What I will say is that those programs are gaining steam. India has a program to go to the moon. Our program, after having stopped in 1972, suddenly kicks up again under Pence, and we're going back to the moon in 2024. It's been 52 years by then. What happened to 50 years of progress? Why didn't they go back at any time during those 50 years? It's absurd. Well, they've been working on the privatization of space. They have a secret space program. There's no question about it. And that really answers the question. In terms of the other countries now, they have their own programs. And they're reaching a point where they see that we have a kind of Achilles heel, which is our secrecy aspect. And so they have this technology on the American side, and they need to find a way, some method, some vehicle to put this out and also to have it be profitable for their side. And this is where the rub is, basically, because they need the threat aspect to create a corridor of funding in Congress that can eventually float into the black budget also. They need to control that narrative. And, you know, when you look at Professor Mark Skidmore's work with Catherine Austin Fitts, former HUD secretary, who's been on this program many times and is coming up next week, the 21 trillion that's missing from her estimates, the figure is actually a lot larger, but that's what they can prove on the ground. That alien thing is going to give you that excuse. Well, we were fighting aliens. We needed the 21 trillion. That's where the missing trillions conversation is going to go. That's the danger here of this money that's flying out the back door and them being able to say it's under national security, it's this alien threat, that's where the money went, don't ask us any questions, instead of catching them with the missing trillions. The missing money is a very important aspect of this, and the black budget aspect is incredibly, this is a major, major issue all around. And, you know, I think the Ttsa attracted people that were genuine in terms of supporting it, around it. But inside of it was like a Trojan horse, the belly of the CIA beast. And they were trying to create a threat narrative. They had the media under their control, and they were ratcheting up the bills. And now they have the History Channel show, and they had Elizondo, you know, coming out, and he was going to be their man. By the way, I think they've moved that around at times. Sometimes they thought Reid was going to be their front guy. They originally thought they could use the Bobo aspect in this for DeLonge. That didn't work. When he came out, he almost destroyed the whole thing. But Elizondo is not a very particularly good front man either. So I think that he was kind of a trade-off at a certain point. But nonetheless, he was supposed to give them their gravitas, and he was supposed to be the key. So this was the whole setup that was arranged, and that Podesta was a part of on the Clinton side originally. And that goes back to 2015 and 2016. So it's a pretty messy political show. It's a pretty messy intelligence side. And then you have this real clash, which we saw today on display with George Stephanopoulos talking to President Trump, and President Trump saying, I don't want to go any further on this. And them trying to get him baited into this ET conversation and using the Ttsa logo and graphics and all that junk. You know, it's been exposed. So the lie is over. So now what? The media is still hanging on to it. People like Bender, their jobs probably depend on it because they've invested so much in it. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Well, this is a great question. I think this is from Grandma Tippy Toes. So once the Ttsa goes down for a third time, what do they have up their sleeve? What's the next step?
Oh, it's an excellent point, because they have come out and been rebuffed and come back and been rebuffed and come back. That shows the kind of power and influence that this group has. I'm sure they have a number of different things up their sleeve. However, I believe that the stopgap through Greenwald's work, through some of the reports we've done here, that reaching the level of the Intercept is the beginning of the end for the narrative. And everyone knows that. And if they think that they can hide out in the ivory tower behind TV shows and entertainment stuff and stay away and just have Elizondo do softball stuff, they're heading down faster than a lead balloon, because that's not going to fly. Yes.
Well, but what about these UFOs that they saw that supposedly were in the sky above the Japanese tankers?
Well, the UFO, it's very interesting. The UFO file, the sightings go on. And all of these things are moving on. Of course, we had those Wilson documents get released recently. And, you know, I mean, they're documents from the late 90s. And to be fair, like Stephen Greer did speak about them already, so they're not all that new. You notice TTSA is not jumping on that or really getting into that. I guess if they wanted actual disclosure, but it's not theirs, see? So they're like, that doesn't comport with our ATIP Elizondo story, so why should we even bother with that? But I will say this, that the UFO thing is always volatile. Anything can happen that can blow their story away. Also, when we think about stories like the Phoenix Lights and all the rest of it, these are major incidents that could happen. And the government is always trying to manage that perception thing. TTSA is just an op, and there have been a lot of these ops which, instead of getting to the pure information, they create this filter where you're supposed to go into the UFO thing through this. Look at this grainy thing, that we got from this gun camera footage, and tie it into your head to this idea of the New York Times and Elizondo, and that's supposed to be the birth. It's the birth of the UFO event. Mm-hmm. The UFO thing happened in 1947, and that's when Kenneth Arnold saw them and called them flying saucers. That's what's launched the whole thing. And so therefore, trying to reinvent it in 2017 was bogus, and it didn't work. And there were major mistakes made over and over again. Even the principals inside those companies, even Knapp will admit that they made mistakes, which is extraordinary because he's given them an incredibly soft cushion ride, as a lot of these journalists have, which is extraordinary for me watching. What's even more extraordinary is how much pull do you need to have with the mainstream media to pull this off? That shows us the real grip of the political side and the CIA on this, because they were coming through the Clinton campaign. They were ready, but they did not get Clinton as president. That's what sank the op ultimately. But the actual question of the UFO thing is just larger and larger. It has nothing to do with this CIA engineering of the junk. As a matter of fact, it's been suggested to me by Dr. Joseph Farrell that the reason that the CIA was so involved in this is that they had lost control of the UFO file and were trying to get it back. So I think that makes a lot of sense also. Yes, Ms. Livia.
Where does Lavenda fit into this? I understand that he has some sort of an intelligence connection in his background since he was a teenager.
Yeah, but what I'll say about a guy like Lavenda is I think he's just a writer caught up with getting a paycheck. And I think at this point, it would be better for him to move on, because he's done some good work in the past, obviously. But they approached some of the best writers. They approached Farrell, like I said, and he's gone on record saying that they originally offered him $30,000, but then also suggested he could make hundreds of thousands of dollars. So when you're working in this field and plowing away, that's very tempting stuff. And we've also heard from people behind the scenes that they've gone to other researchers trying to get them on board with influence, saying you can be part of this show or that. And they're trying to do it. And you would say, well, if they were the real thing, that would be great, wouldn't it? Because you'd have a group that was out there trying to bring UFO disclosure, and they were trying to get people funded and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, every time you look at it, you're looking at Lockheed Martin, threat, tons of CIA people, high-ranking CIA people with decades of experience. And they're really laying it on thick for the American people. So very, very dangerous. I saw that Groovy did send me some of these.
I do want to ask you, someone was citing Gigi from last night about how things are ramping up.
Yes.
No question. Could you address that? What do you think that's all about in reference to the UFO file?
This is a stage, a period. As we come into 2020, it's a major election. And we're seeing everything. We've done a lot of shows on the hot zone, and all this Atlantis rising and landmass is rising off the East Coast, which is also kind of its own type of disclosure about an ancient culture that was there. We're right in the nexus of all these things. The UFO thing is something that the CIA tried to get their hands on and use as a threat. And they were really, everywhere you went in the last month, they were banging you over the head with really absurd, really making you, bullying you into believing into UFOs, which is a weird thing because the mainstream media has blocked this subject for 70 years or so. So it is extraordinary, the change that's taking place. But there's a danger when you're into that ramping up period. The most important thing is if we have the truth on the ground, we can deflate the false operations. I think that's crucial. There is one question that Groovy asked, and that's in here, which says, there was a really good one in here. There's a bunch of good ones, but one of them was the idea that if they did, if the tanker thing were UFOs, which they were, according to the owner of the tanker, they were flying objects and he couldn't identify them. Those are UFOs. Was it a false flag? That's very interesting. Could that be tied in? Could they use a UFO false flag operation and use it and say, aha, there's the UFOs. That's the threat. Let's go after them. That's what they're building up to ultimately. Was the Iran tanker one? It's a very curious thing, I have to say. But it's going to be very hard for them to use it as a pretext to go to war with Iran, even though people, neocons in the Trump administration like Bolton, want that, which is absurd. Yes.
Isn't there a famous quote, you would know this, from someone like Rockefeller about how we would just, bow down?
That's Kissinger.
Is it Kissinger?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the quote?
Well, I don't know the entire quote off the top of my head, but I will say this. What he said, the gist of it was, right now they're clamoring for their rights. And this was right after the LA riots. But if we could bring in some kind of external threat, like a UFO threat, then they would be begging us for protection and security. They'd give up any rights. They wouldn't even be thinking about them. So this is one of those, classic Kissinger lost in the Bilderberg mix quotes, and you can take it or leave it. But I will say that I do think that they think in this fashion. I wanted to point out one quick thing so that we understand where Trump stands and why he had this reaction when he was dealing with Stephanopoulos today. Trump is incredibly in the know on the UFO file, and that's thanks to this man. I have a program out there, which is an X-series program called Tesla, Trump, and the Time Capsule, which sums this up better than I will here, but I want everyone to have this information. That is Dr. John Trump, Professor Trump, and he was deep in scientific engineering, dealing with X-rays, and he was a major figure at MIT. His mentor was Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was identified by Robert Sarbarker as the head of the UFO file. And anyone who knows Vannevar Bush's background, he also was the president of MIT. Robert Sarbarker, who's the person who brought this out. By the way, John Trump was very close to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump makes it known over and over again, especially when he's overseas in these speeches, about how close he was with his uncle and how his uncle shared all these things with him. John Trump, I should say, was called in after Nikola Tesla's death, and the FBI wanted to know if there was information in his papers about a death ray and something that could take down flying objects at a distance. In other words, I'm in Hawaii and I press a button and something goes down over the UK. This is what they were particularly concerned with, and a few years later they would coin the term unidentified flying objects, which is what I think they were concerned about. This was 1943 when Tesla died, and John Trump is the man that they sent in, apparently on the recommendation of Vannevar Bush. Sarbarker, the physicist who worked on the UFO file and talked about how they redeveloped the advanced technology in the 80s, and he said, I don't know why they didn't let that information out or why they're still keeping it secret. Well, he died shortly after that, interestingly enough. And I'll say this about Robert Sarbarker, who put that on the record. If you search now for any major scientist, he was huge. He was about as big as Oppenheimer. He was on that level. And you should be able to find him in any history book or any encyclopedia. When you search Wikipedia for Robert Sarbarker, you will find the notation, this Robert Sarbarker does not exist. He's become an unperson because he put it on the record. So let's think about that for a minute. But the point is ultimately that John Trump had that knowledge. He'd worked on the Tesla file. He'd worked on the UFO file under his mentor, Vannevar Bush. Anyone who studied the UFO file knows that Vannevar Bush had the control, but Sarbarker was an esteemed physicist, and he let us know that Vannevar Bush was in charge of it for a decade. It's a long time. So John Trump, with that knowledge, passing it along to Donald is pretty major. pretty major. Yes.
Okay, Najat Madri. Do you think the Clintons knew Trump's family background and his uncle?
Well, I'll tell you, the Clintons used to praise Trump a lot more, and he used to contribute to them. So I think it is interesting. I think the great X factor when you get into John Trump and Trump's knowledge about the UFOs is that people don't know this, and I've pointed it out many times on this X series, which is that Richard Nixon and Donald Trump were very close friends, and Nixon knew the UFO file better than almost any president, having been a part of CIA Blue Book, which was the real Blue Book as far back as the 50s. And of course, having firsthand access, and we've covered the story of his time capsule relating to the UFO file. So I do think it's fascinating to look at those factors and to really weigh them in this whole kind of side of things. We have to understand that when Nixon, at the end of his life, went to New York and he wrote a letter saying that me and Pat predict that you're going to go into politics and that if you run for president, you're going to win, and that Trump keeps that letter in his office. This is extraordinary information. So we have to keep all those things in mind if we're going to really have the real picture. We have to understand that Trump knows incredible details about the UFO file. Don't think for a second that he doesn't. And he understands now that the op side from the Podesta Elizondo part most certainly does, especially after today's clash. We get a glimpse of that. That's big, though. Getting him on record talking about the UFO file is huge. Yes.
Okay, Dawn Devine. So then what is Trump's angle? Do you think he's really fighting the deep state?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of different things to say in relation to Trump and who he has in there. Trump is one of those presidents where you could say he's done a lot of good things and a lot of bad things. But certainly he shook up the system when he came in. And I think, like him or hate him, they wanted to get from our side, if somebody wanted to vote for him or not, they wanted to get rid of him. The establishment wanted to get rid of him.
And they still want to get rid of him.
Oh, they still do. They're active it. And Stephanopoulos certainly went along with the whole Russian collusion nonsense. And MSNBC staked their entire career on it. And people like Rachel Maddow did all these ridiculous, hysterical reports, kind of like McCarthyism in the 50s.
I just want to say, Trump is a money guy. It's very simple. He makes his decisions based on what is right for America economically. And it's not holistic. Like he just signed the GMO bill. Right?
Yeah. That's a huge letdown.
So, I mean, this is because it makes good economic sense, but it hasn't. And the 5G thing, right, has nothing to do with the health of the American people, but keeps us competitive with China, right?
True.
So this is his MO. It's
an excellent
He's very
point.
myopic around this. This is his agenda, is, I think, to be number one for himself, financially number one, and America number one.
It's a good point. No question about it. Look, the idea of having strong borders, getting us out of foreign entanglements, this whole thing that Trump came in on was the kind of populist nationalist message that was necessary to break the grid of the corporate overlords, and that's why they hate him. I think the problem is that neocon elements have snuck into his planning strategy, and that's made things very complicated in dealing with him. I will say, in relation to where we were with the Hillary presidency coming in, I think we're better off than that. There's no question about it. But you get into politics, and some people really freak out and they like Trump, or they really freak out and they like Clinton. I will say this, that efforts were made on the part of the media and the Central Intelligence Agency to keep him out while promoting Clinton. So that kind of tells you where they were going. And so if the CIA and the media lined up with a candidate, you want to run in the other direction. So we got the right person for that. Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, then we're going to wrap it up. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. You can go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter. That keeps us in touch. We're in this incredibly dynamic situation where it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They're just throwing people off social media left and right. And it doesn't matter, if you're a conservative or a liberal, if you're not spouting that party line, we're done, We're definitely done. And you'll turn around and the whole thing will be gone. Now, so make sure that you do that, and also, subscribe to the show, support us, get behind the things that are good, that are giving you that information, and really, we've made it incredibly affordable for you to do that. So feel free to become a subscriber of Dark Journalist. This summer, with all the reports that we're doing, you're going to want to be a subscriber, and that much I can tell you. Okay, Miss Olivia,
I'm sorry.
final couple of questions.
Well, Person Stern wants you to say happy birthday to his dog.
Happy birthday.
And it's Enki's birthday, so let's say happy birthday to Enki.
Happy birthday, Enki.
Okay. I'm out of questions right now.
Oh, fantastic.
I'll
read. There was one more in the batch that we got from Groovy Bean, who did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for saving the day when our laptop failed.
She's the best.
Okay, let's see. Some of these are pretty amusing. Do you think the CIA is running the show and not private corporations? The black budget is just dollar corporations have all the dollars that they need. Well, what's interesting is it's both. I mean, this is what comprises the deep state, is common interest, right? And so they have a covert government going on, and we have the overt one. And the overt public one has things that we would expect, like law and order, justice, voting in elections, and things that adhere to the constitutions. The covert government doesn't do any of that. There are times when that covert government will step into the public space to achieve a policy goal, change a policy. And they have to do that, and they leave strange trails that researchers pick up on when they leave. And we get an idea that, like, oh, Booz Allen Hamilton, they're contractors for the CIA. That starts to make sense. These things start to come to us, and we start to get a picture of what that might be. And when we examine these things on this program, we're always coming at it from both levels. We never say, well, it's just the government or it's just the corporations. Not every corporation is bad. I mean, some of them do good work, of course, and not every government official is bad. There's many brave government officials who, the more that we out this stuff, the more tools that they have to fight the system that's in there. But there's something about that nexus between the corrupt government aspects and this kind of overlord corporate situation with Facebook, with Amazon. I can say that these are companies that are aspiring to a corporate rule, and that's something that we need to shake up and expose. And every year they meet at Davos, and that crowd gets together. And what it looks like is a bunch of billionaires over here, figuring out our future based on their statistics. Well, we're over here fighting the good fight, on the ground in the public. And that's too much of an imbalance, as we've seen in incomes, especially in America. Those are the types of things, when they get top heavy, they fall over. That's how you get the French Revolution and things. So even these people would be smart to stop this process. And, we've seen this all with New York, too, with the forced vaccinations for Hasidic Jews. They went after Rudolf Steiner's Waldorf school recently. Those things, it's not a good, that's really not a good direction. And it makes me feel bad for the people in New York, really. So we're in a New York and California are leading the way towards this kind of degeneration. And I think that what we see is the Central Intelligence Agency plays a big role with this, but it's part of a bigger structure. And Peter Dale Scott called it the deep state, deep politics, deep events. These are the things that he connoted that they were. But what he said was that you have to think of it like a system. And I think that that's important, that these things come together and they have these tools, these ways and means at their capability. They really are a kind of a covert force moving parallel with our regular system. And I think people like the Kennedys try to call out a lot of that covert action. And that's why we had the major civil war of the 60s, where they shot all those leaders. Because, if you look back on it, that side, in that war, they won, right? They killed those leaders, and we got people like Johnson and Ford. I mean, so, you take that as a trade-off. But yeah, it is quite extraordinary when you look at it.
Right, and we know that astrologically, that cycle is coming around again
Yes.
right now, this summer.
Yes.
It's going to be a summer of protests. It's going to be very intense. And we discussed this. They know that. If we know that, they know that.
Yes, no question about it.
So what are they doing? They're giving us Extinction Rebellion. They're creating their own rebellion, their own kind of
so we can
peaceful
sign
riots.
on to that.
See, exactly. And instead of having our own, instead of
Right.
getting really, ending the Fed or, some other
Right.
things,
Right. They'll just create the impeach Trump thing, even though they know that they can't.
Well,
really
the
make it
climate
happen.
change thing is just you wait. That's the hot topic.
That's a good one too. Wow.
That's what Extinction Rebellion is all about, and it's global.
Fantastic.
And they're getting the kids involved.
Yes, excellent point. My God, Olivia, you're on fire tonight. I have to say, thank you everyone for joining us. It's a fantastic show. It's great to be with you. And I saw Rika, the hopeful volunteerist, out there. Great to have you out there. Bruce Ross Morgan, of course. I know Kate was out there earlier. It's great to see Kate and a cult fan. Who else we got? Mark Anthony. Terrific. Fantastic. We will see you all. Groovy Bean, of course, did a great job tonight. Thank you. And Lee Veltman, Grandma Tippy Toes. Fantastic people tonight. We will see you all next week.
Right. Say a little prayer for the laptop.
I'm sure that say an Apple
they
prayer.
seem to have zapped it out of existence.
Oh, that's really it's a tough loss. We will see you next Friday, and at 8 p.m. we have a very special guest coming on also, which I will confirm later this week. And
wait, one last question.
Yes.
Daniel Natal, are we headed towards a civil war?
Wow. Well, for Natal, that's a very serious question because we know he's a very funny guy. I would say that the Civil War is part of what they stoke, and that they have moved into this position on a number of occasions. They've tried to stoke those divisions and really create the situation so we don't get a handle on some of the things that they're working on behind the scenes. I think that it can be avoided. But certainly, I think there are forces who feel like that's really the answer that they can move forward with.
Well, as long as we fight each other, we won't fight them.
Excellent point. Wow, extraordinary. And my feeling on it is, it's always up in the air in relation to the forces. When these forces are slamming into each other and opposing each other, they'll use us. They'll use the people on the ground, as cannon fodder for their battles. And certainly we've seen it over and over again, and we've seen that kind of manipulation. If we can clean up the media, then that's a big step towards it. And this whole thing that we did tonight, really calling the media to task on the mainstream side and on the alternative side in relation to the Ttsa. The Ttsa is not going to get away with, this whole strategy that they've had of ivory tower, granting interviews to minions and, promising favors and all that stuff. The lie's over on that, Ttsa boys. You're going to have to come up with a totally different approach and throw those CIA guys out of there. And everyone who is a responsible writer and around the independent media, the more that you reject that type of influence peddling by these types of groups that are connected with the intelligence agencies, the better it's going to be for all of us, because now's the time to do it. And do not play along and play footsie with these guys. It's too late. They're outed. Look to the work of The Intercept. Look to the work of The Black Vault, John Greenwald, The Dark Journalist Show. This is out there for all to see. So it's undeniable now. Yes.
Yeah. Let's have higher standards, please.
Yeah. Let's work on some standards. I like it. Thank you very much, everyone.
By the way, there's a drinking game going on. Every time you run your hand through your hair, take another shot.
Of course, they're only drinking lemonade, though. It's right. It's great.
People
to have
are also
everyone.
taking bets on whether you're wearing pants.
I am. I think you can attest to that. My pants are on. It's fantastic to see everyone, and we're going to see you next Friday. It's going to be very exciting. Good to see you out there, Daniel Natal. It's a nice question. And, it's really great. I mean, it's fantastic. I always love the Saturday night shows, and we really had to do this one because there were too many things brewing on this, and it's just too important. But we had a fantastic show last night with Gigi Young going into Gurdjieff and the Gobi. And that show is getting extraordinary questions on that all day.
Yeah, the six fingers.
The six fingers.
If you guys are not following us on Twitter, you really should be. There's a lot. It's, we don't have a forum, but we sort of have a Twitter forum where we swap
Yes.
ideas and images. And
well, that's the thing. Now, it's at Dark Journalist. That's the main one. But at O Wings Girl, Olivia is so active on there and always coming up with this incredible stuff.
Although I am being thwarted.
They're
slowing down
happening.
My feed. Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of targeting. That's why everyone needs to sign up for the newsletter. And that's important, too, because make sure you get the newsletter once a week. The newsletter is free, and it just lets you know what shows are coming up and what themes we're going to be stressing. Look, this is moving into overdrive. There's been a lot of things that have been leaked in the UFO community on purpose. Getting a handle on it ties into the missing money, which is a major issue. So the UFO question is big enough as it is. The UFO file is a major aspect of what we cover in the X series. But the way it's being manipulated right now should have us all up in arms. And we really should demand those answers. People from the Intercept are, people like Greenwald, and what we're doing here on this show. We need those answers now, and you got to throw the CIA out of there. We're not going to work with the CIA on UFO disclosure. Get them out. Let's do it. Just haul them out. What is it? Hashtag get them out. How's that? We'll see everyone next week. And I guess the last question is, what's for dinner?
I think it was Ttsa Dick was talking about chocolate ice cream, and I got thwarted last night. It was too late. I'm dying for sundae.
A sundae?
Yes, like chocolate with caramel sauce.
Wow. Well,
extra cherries.
It sounds like a plan, actually. We'll have to work that one out, but I do feel that chocolate could be in the air. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
You did a great job, Miss Olivia.
Thank you.
Rounds of applause for Miss Olivia.
And thank you, Groovy Bean.
Thank you, Groovy Bean. I could applaud here all night.
Outstanding.
Fantastic. We'll see you next week, and have a great Sunday. Have a happy Father's Day.
Absolutely.
And we know that's going to be.
Men rock. Don't forget.
Now, if I said that, you understand, I'd never live it down.
I love my dad. My dad is a good guy. He's a white guy, and he's a good guy. So I'm defending good white men. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, my dad, may he rest in peace, was an extraordinary thinker. And I have to say that he was an all-around great guy also.
He was a great singer and a great chef and a fantastic raconteur. I wonder where you get it.
Exactly. He was one of the smartest guys I've ever met in my life. But he
a lay preacher.
He definitely had an extraordinary way with people, and he was very warm.
And what was his big quote when he would start a diatribe? Let me tell you about those chemical companies.
Let me tell you about those chemical companies. Yeah, he knew a lot. The man knew a lot. So yes, have a very happy Father's Day wherever you celebrate it, and happy Father's Day to your dad, Olivia. And we will see you all next week.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Have some ice cream.
How do you say chocolate in Spanish?
Chocolate.
Hey, well, there you go.